And it's great, isn't it, to be back at a live conference. Probably the first time I haven't been on mute for 5 minutes. Or indeed, hopefully I've got the right presentation here and not one I wasn't expecting. So I'm guessing this will... Okay, we'll go back. Right, so I'm going to talk about risk management strategy. And I should preface by saying that I'm not trying to be the risk manager for all investments into carbon or biodiversity or whatever. I'm just talking about the project on the ground, right? So this is a very, what I would say, a practical ground-level presentation about risk management. It's not about the bigger thing, about country risk or anything else. So we're looking at it from a specific project point of view. And I should say I'm here with my wonderful team. Dan, who's going to stand up. There you go, that's Dan. He's our key man. And Ming, that does all our analysis and uses various modeling software. So they're the guys who will answer all the questions because they remember everything, and I don't always. So a small introduction. You've got the agenda here, and we'll talk about ourselves just for about a minute. We'll have a look at forests as a buffer to rising global temperatures and the impact of volatile climate on losses. So I'm talking about forestry losses, project losses, losses on the ground. And then we'll have a look at risk mitigation. So again, the investor, the forest manager, the carbon registries, and risk transfer to global insurers. On the right, you've probably got an unfamiliar global map there, but it shows all the countries with equal areas and so on. And if you have a pair of scissors, you can make a globe out of that. But all those yellow dots are where we have done risk analysis on the ground for forest or whatever else it is. So we really do have a sort of worldwide experience and a practical one. And from time to time, we also visit these projects to gather information. Much less so now than used to be 20 or 30 years ago when, of course, we didn't have the same technology. So Globe itself, forestry is a sort of brand name. We're part of Globe, and that's part of Adonna. So it's just a brand within a big group. And we are an agency, we insure, and we're supported by global insurers around the world. So if we do have a large client that we cannot insure entirely ourselves, we can go to Swiss Re or Munich or any of the other big ones around the world, and they will support us. So it's a very specialist market, and as you see, we've been doing it since 2005, and I would think it's fair to say that our small team has more experience than just about any other team in the world when it comes to forestry and forestry-related risk. And as you see, we issue Lloyd's A-rated paper, so it stands up to your credit checks. And that's our role, as I said, to quantify and price risk. On the right there, you've got just a range of the common natural hazard perils that we insure, and on the left, a couple of scary pictures. Siberian fires, very disturbing what's happening in that part of the world, and recently Storm Arwen that belted down the right-hand side of the UK and did a phenomenal amount of damage. So let's have a look at climate warming and role of forestry. You will all be familiar with the IPCC report back in, whenever it was, 2021. Unless there's immediate, rapid and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, limiting warming to 1.5 will be beyond reach. And only possibly last week, the FT reported on the fact that there's a 50-50 chance of exceeding that target within the next 5 years. So there is very little time to lose, as people have pointed out already. And for us, where we are looking at risk every day of our working lives, it is a really serious issue. So as a start, we all know this, forestry is the only immediate solution that can be operated at scale to mitigate climate warming. There is a system, we've heard this morning that it needs to be improved and coordinated, but nevertheless, the certification, verification, everything else works reasonably well. We have to remove 10 gigatons of carbon by 2050, and if we can engage on avoided deforestation, that is probably the biggest contribution to reducing global warming, as that is one of the biggest emitters at the moment. And as I said, forest carbon possibly amongst the cheapest and the at most volume of any other technical solution at the moment. However, forests are at risk. This is how it works, of course. One ton of carbon, 2 tons of wood is equivalent to 3.67 tons of CO2. So you can see that if you destroy a ton of wood, you have big emissions, and if you can sequester it, you can reverse that process. So the challenge is rising temperatures and volatility. You've got the chart there, screaming up to the right-hand side, with 2020 being the hottest amongst the last 3 years, and in fact 2021 is the hottest in the last 7 years. And we're heading for +3 or +5 degrees without intervention. I popped in a map of India late last night because it's such a big thing. It's extraordinary what is going on, not just the impact on the people there, but also the impact on global grain production and everything else. It's April and May temperatures, as you see, is continuing to go at that level. And extreme temperatures lead to extreme events. To my favorite photos, if you like, Australia, 2009, and more recently, the extra-tropical storm Ophelia that belted up the west coast of Europe, hitting Portugal and dropping flaming brands all over the countryside, starting fires as you looked at the villages and their surroundings. And then that went on to hit Ireland and blow a lot of our trees down. So these storms do matter to us very much. A little depressing table here showing you the size of some of the biggest wildfires in the world recently. I won't go through them all because they're all much the same. They're all disasters, really. The picture you just saw on the last slide was that Australia Black Saturday 2009, 450,000 hectares. We thought that was big until 2019 and 20, when an area greater than the UK was affected by wildfire. And I've added a note there that the Australian fires in 2019-20 was 8.3 million hectares of native forest and about 130,000 of managed commercial plantations, which in itself is just an indicator that forest fire management can be effective. The last big event for us was 2016 and 17 in Chile, when after several years of drought and then a locked anticyclone off the coast, burnt in those middle regions of 7 and 8, 24 and 31% of plantations in a single year. So they were losses way above anything expected by commercial foresters in that territory, and it reset, if you like, how they insured. And what's happening? Well, not just an increase in temperature, but you're also getting a steady decrease in rainfall. And a couple of charts there for August for the West Coast, the distribution of fires in Oregon, and the time that they occurred. And that can be repeated in any country you like. Also USA, the upward trend of burnt hectares in wildfires, but the number of fires tends to stay the same. So that's telling you that ignitions might be pretty constant, but the conditions under which they happen will lead to different sizes of fire. And that is true also of managed plantations of whatever their size. So the trick is, of course, to be ready for when that ignition occurs if you're in high fire risk conditions. A long-term chart of Australian forestry losses. I think it speaks for itself, doesn't it? And those last two right-hand columns is the fire season for 19 and 20, so they sort of run together, which is why you can see the 130,000 hectares of plantation destroyed in that fire season. And certainly the forest losses in Australia, on top of the Chilean losses to the insurance sector, had a big impact. It scared out of the forestry insurers. So insurance capacity globally has shrunk dramatically since those events. Of course, it's not just fires. It's also hurricanes and typhoons, which are related to greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. A couple of pictures just to give a bit of an impact there. 2017, 3 hurricanes in the same screenshot burning across the Atlantic, and 2025 hurricanes. It's an extraordinary event, and these, I'm sure, will be repeated. They tend to cluster, so that's the way it happens. So you may get 10 or 15 years of quiet times as far as winds and hurricanes are concerned, and then you might get 3 or 4 all at once, or certainly in successive year. So Laura was the last big one we enjoyed, and had a couple of substantial claims from Louisiana and Texas. But it's not all about hurricanes. It's also about localized windstorms. Those in the States will think of tornadoes, but of course elsewhere it is the sort of thing we've had, like Storm Laura that came down in November of last year and caused severe damage, in fact the greatest damage for the last 40 years in the UK. You can see the distribution there of the losses from Scotland. They change to red when they go to England, so you can see the country division there. And those are all areas where damage is suspected to be found. So that was a sort of indicator map so the assessors could see where to go. But we've also had that Polish storm, violent localized windstorm, 45,000 hectares destroyed. So I'm a bit of a Jeremiah, aren't I? So if the first session I was described as depressed, or was it repressed? I can't remember. But you can see why. We see the forestry world a slightly jaundiced view as we're focusing just on all the bad news all the time. But that enables us to make some contribution to perhaps how that might be managed. Yeah, a little picture of Storm Arwen there, substantial damage up in Scotland. So the final section, what have we got to say about risk management? Now remember my opening remarks, we're not going to manage, we're not going to suggest how investors manage their investments. However, we can make a comment about where they might invest finally. And it doesn't matter where you are in the world, it's split into high risk and low risk. It's just a matter of finding which bits are where. And the technology exists to map certainly fire footprints for yourselves, and that can be part of your due diligence before selecting a site. The Oregon map shows, and you've seen it before already, the distribution of long-term fires within the state. But if you're going near the coast, a very good long-term fire record there. I do mention EarthBlocks there, which is a tool that Edinburgh University has been developing for us, and we'll hear more about that tomorrow from Ian and his team. But it is a tool that's very easy to use for people like us that aren't coders and draw down or depend upon internationally available data sets. Similarly, if you're looking at Australia, we have 3 little charts there, the part of eastern Victoria on the left, the forest cover in the middle, and if you really want to depress yourself, look at 20 years of burn scars on the right. And this tool enabled us to have a look at all those, when they occurred, how big they were, and what was burning. So all the information to select your site for investment is available. You just need the right tools to do that. So there's no need anymore to say natural hazard risk is low or medium. You can actually put a number on it. You can price it. And of course, as insurers, that's what we have to do. We have to price it so it brings a return to the insurers, and of course provides a fair price to the buyer. Similarly, if you're worried about wind, you should be, then there are two coasts that you should avoid, in my view, because you'll be hit sometime in the next 100 years. And remember that we are talking about a permanence, aren't we, for carbon? You're not talking about a quick, well, I suppose you could do if you're using 10 years, but in the long term, you do want, ideally, to have a site that's not going to be hit by a hurricane or tornado or whatever within the foreseeable future. And there you have, certainly on the map of the States, detailed records of the number of hurricanes since 1851. And for China, we can see that Taiwan is the most exposed. Excuse me. Hainan, not so bad, and Guangdong is in between. The comment there about parts of the southeast, the USA, two intense hurricanes every 3 years, impacting an average of 10% of your carbon credits. It's quite a thought. So that is something, it seems to me, you can manage. Let's have a look at management of fires, which is the most common form of loss. It is probably about 75% of our losses across the world, wind making up the balance. Wind tends to be a bit chunky when it comes, but forest fires are always with us. So as a manager, you are preparing for the risk way ahead of time. So you're looking for conditions that build up over seasons. In the Chile case, it was several years of drought. But it could be winter rainfall, it could be snowpack. Any number of things will tell you how your site is going to be, how vulnerable it might be to fire in the forthcoming fire season. So that's a background. Then you've got the conditions for fire ignition. Not all ignitions lead to losses. So the secret is, as a manager, to be prepared for those ignitions when they occur. Remember, we said that fire ignitions, the numbers are pretty consistent over years. It's just how do those fires develop that changes by condition and by your readiness to fight the fire. And a key thing, monitor high fire critical weather days. These are the ones where you need to be really on your toes. Days where it's over 30 degrees C, the wind speed is more than 30 meters per second, and the humidity is less than 30%. And when you get down to those sort of levels, you can get spontaneous combustion of forest fuels and so on. So here are three sort of guidelines to make sure that you are prepared. The US map, just there for a bit of visual impact, but you can see the US has had a lot of drought just recently. So planning for fire ignition. Generally, in the mid or low latitudes, people start fires, whether in the cars throwing cigarettes away. So that's why I'm saying hot spots. You've got the roads. They can start there through people throwing away cigarettes or exhaust bursting into flames or whatever it is. And these are all cases that have started major fires where vehicles stop and break down, and because of the heat, the rubbish around the exhaust burns, and the rest, as you might say, is history. But roadside facilities, not just coffee I'm talking about, it's about comfort breaks for lorry drivers in the back of beyond. Villages, recreational areas, if you're thinking about the States where people are camping and lighting fires and so on. So all this is a guide for where you have your resources ready to fight the fire. Also know what's on your boundaries. I added this. Recently we had a South African fire. It turns out that the neighbors were growing marijuana on the edge of the forest, and we believe that the police were informed, and the owners of this crop then decided to burn the crop to remove any evidence. So sort of an amusing story, but it did quite a lot of damage to our insured forest. And there's no reason today why you cannot know what is on the boundaries of your forest. We have all the technology, and that is a responsibility of the forest manager. And then we provide recommendations. We produced this 2 or 3 years ago when a major international investor in forestry, who is very well respected, had a very big loss due to fire in Cambodia, and when we read all the reports, these things were what I might call elementary reasons why a fire might start, and included things like, you know, people were in the forest looking for honey and so on, and when they're moving through the forest, they can start fires. South Africa years ago had issues with forest fires starting because the workers were cooking their lunch. So one of the solutions was the company actually provided lunch packs for the forest workers to avoid fires being started in the middle of the fire season, in the middle of a dense forest. So it's housekeeping. It's housekeeping. And the document is just a list of things you should be looking at. This is, I always put this slide in. I was amazed when I first came across this 2 or 3 years ago, but there is a column of fire output in kilowatts per meter, and you can see that the current limit to suppression is right at the bottom. If you have lorries and aircraft and chemicals and so on and so forth, after that it just gets too much. There's too much energy coming out of these things. This is why prevention is the answer, and not waiting for not waiting till the fire's grown beyond your capability to fight it. It's an extraordinary column, really, and you can see some of the big events like Back Saturday and, well, Ash Wednesday I haven't mentioned before, but that was the daddy of them all back in, was it 1983. But it's really important that we get a grip on the ignition points for fire and respond quickly. The comment on the left comes from an international institution represented here today, where they said, we prefer to invest in fire prevention and minimizing risk rather than obtaining insurance covers. And I say that because it's a perfectly sensible thing to say. However, the point about these slides, these horrible pictures, is that the extreme event is something beyond our ability to control, and they appear to be getting more frequent. So 20 or 30 years, you know, in the life of investment in forestry, that is within that period. So you really do need to be cognizant of the fact that you cannot control extreme fires. They will do a lot of damage, and this is possibly the time you need the global insurance system to be standing behind your investment, whether it's big or small. Risk management by registries. Well, I'm no expert on registries, but we all know registries have buffers, and the buffer is there to provide some guarantee of permanence of carbon credits. But of course, who knows whether that buffer is big enough? So you can imagine it's the whole system is set up so that for every project, 15 or 20% of the carbon credits produced by a project will be put into buffer, where it's not sold, but it's there available to replace lost carbon in the project as and when some loss happens. Risk management, future fire risk. Yeah, I'm not quite sure why I put this in, other than to give you a visual about the high fire critical days. Again, it's one of these slides that really impacts on you. The green is a historic number of high fire critical days, remember 30, 30, 30, and the red is the future predicted frequency. And you can see in this one slide for one particular country, in February, for example, the incidence of high fire critical weather days goes from 1% to 4% by 2050. Just more bad news, isn't it? But you know, it is all about planning and being prepared. And finally, risk transfer by insurance. Insurance is there not to cover the day-to-day risks, what we might call attritional losses. It's there to cover the risk that you cannot afford, the loss you can't afford to have. And that is, if you like, what we as a team do. We can make recommendations about the sort of risks you retain yourself and at what level it's transferred to insurers, and indeed how much insurance you need. it's certainly true to say that across a portfolio, not all the forest burns. So you saw the figures right at the start in Australia and Chile, those worst forest fires that we've seen. What were their numbers? 20 to 34%. And they're huge numbers of the plantation stock burnt. But it does indicate that you don't have to insure 100% of the standing value of a major investor. I'm not talking about village farms, village plots that might be 3 or 4 or 10 hectares. They could, of course, be entirely destroyed. But for portfolios that may be hundreds or thousands of hectares. And when it comes to carbon, then there are a number of products, if you like, that we are working on. And I was told at this point to mention somebody in the audience. Who is it, Bob? Do you want to say? Have I? Oh, he wants to be mentioned because he's part of a team working on the development of forestry carbon products with Marsh. But Aon, I have to say, there are other brokers working on this. And others besides. So everybody now, at last, after 20 years, that's how long I've been waiting for forest carbon to become significant, is looking at how do we provide effective insurance products. The first one, carbon project establishment insurance, is under construction, if you like. So from day one, when you're beginning to look for land to the day you start planting, that is a long period, as you all know, 4 or 5 years, very, very expensive. And if something big happens before the end of that, then the idea of the insurance is, of course, to put you back in your financial condition that you were when you started, so you can at least carry on or start again or whatever. The second one, we do now, we're already quoting, by the way, forestry carbon projects to cover against investment costs. So this is once planting has taken place, we'll cover the natural hazards against loss of those to a whole range of perils that you saw in the early slide. And probably the most difficult one is the carbon permanence insurance, something to support the registries, something that will make sure that no matter what happens, the validity of your certified carbon is retained over the lifetime required to approach permanence. And I think that is it. Don't know what's happening here. Do you want to see some? Oh, right, it was a blank slide. No, don't know what's going on now. But there, that's... It was all going so well, wasn't it? But... do you want to ask if you've got any questions? Do I want to... Oh, does anybody have any questions? Well, I have a little drink here.
There's quite a few. 1, 2, 3.
Hello. Hi. Sorry. Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Phil. Quick question on the last slide. How far are we from that holy grail of being able to replace the buffer pool essentially with a carbon permanence insurance product?
How far away? Well, the concept has been around since 2000. The Californians, 2009, 8, 9, has been sitting around for interest to gather in the market. So the brains are working on it now. There are a number of little wrinkles that we're talking to insurance carriers about to see, to perhaps produce the ideal solution. And how long? I would like to think 3 months we might have something. And the reason I'm saying 3 months and not now is we haven't had the conversations with reinsurers, the Munichs of this world and others, to see if they will provide certain covers. And there'll be 2 things. Could I talk to the microphone? I thought this would be better than Zoom, but it's just the same, isn't it? The same problems.
I am offended, Phil.
I don't blame myself. Oh yes, sorry, it's me. Let's get rid of that. It's not just. Yes, so the reason I'm saying 3 months is that we just haven't gone to them with a specific product. It's like going to investor. You don't go with a half-baked idea. We've got the half-baked ideas on my laptop over there, right? But I have to put detail to that and show how it would work and terms and conditions and everything else. So that's where we're putting our time now. But that would be good, actually, if we could do that. But in terms of what's going on around the world, I would suggest that everybody is at that first planting stage. If it's reforestation, ignore avoided deforestation. We've probably got 2 or 3 years actually to get it right, because everybody's at that early stage, and we can cover that type of risk. Yeah. You can ask another one. I'm just reading what's on here.
Yeah.
So.
Catch the virtual audience.
What?
The question from the virtual audience.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I thought you couldn't read this screen. Okay, well, I'll read this out because I will. Years ago, I remember some research on creating artificial rain cloud more for drinking water in the Middle East than fire prevention. Has there been any development in this technology? Is it a viable tool in our armory to tackle forest fires? Are there other new technology? This is Virginia, so thank you for that. It's very interesting, actually. For years ago, and I forget the country, but it was something in Central Asia, Mongolia or something. And there was a big winter fire, actually, going on. And they did use rain guns. They shot things into the clouds and actually put it out through creating a snowstorm. But I mean, this is, you don't have so much control. It's like trying to control frost in French orchards by a compression wave from a big tulip-shaped thing stood in the orchard. It's all a bit inefficient. You're much better for your French orchards burning rubber tires, dare I say, to heat the ground and to protect it from frost. But no, so that's the only occasion where some sort of what's the word, catalyst to make it rain or snow actually put out a forest fire. I haven't seen it since, but it is used from time to time. I would say old technology. I haven't heard this for maybe 10 years.